Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles.
So I would like to begin today. First of all, I wanted to deal with the two mailings that I sent. But first I want to deal with this as a carryover from last week, but it still has relevance to some of the discussion in this week's reading. Then a series of quotes I included in the mailing I sent you with the 4 pages, sections from the book, that I felt were sort of summary or, basically conveyed the points that he was trying to make in a reasonably accessible way. In other words, not spread out too much. But is there anybody who has anything, any burning question from the reading that we had for this week, for chapters 6 and 7? Any question that has kept you up at night or has given you heartburn?
He writes very well.
Yeah, he does. I mean, one of the good things, yes, I see your hand, Tybal. One of the good things, I mentioned this once before, he repeats things a lot.
Yes.
Good, but in a sense, it sort of helps drill it into your head. I mean, if I were editing a book, for the sake of, just making it less spread out and so forth, I probably would have edited it differently. But, when you think about, he said up front that this is also for a Christian audience, because they're dealing with he's trying to deal with the notion that Judaism, that love was not part of foundational Judaism. And so the fact that he repeats it, that's why he's sort of beating the horse, shall we say. Although it's not a dead horse for any reason. Right. Okay, so Tybal, hands up.
You said not a problem, but things that made me think. 2 things in chapter 6 really I stopped to think about, and one was I'd never heard the use of the term partialist.
Yeah, as opposed to impartial.
Yes, but then he made it just the word partialist and what it meant. So I really thought about that, and I know I say this often, but it brought me back to Rabbi Elliot Dorff and his sense of different cultural frameworks, that the same thing, because I think, I could be wrong, but I think that Western American, the knee-jerk reaction is impartial has to be better all the time. So that was one thing. And the other is I do not know Proverbs well at all. And there are a few Proverbs that I know, but I didn't know 27:10 with a close neighbor better than a distant brother. And that really made me want to learn commentary on the meaning of distance. Is it more than geographic? Is it when one has a particularly not helpful sibling reactions? I really stopped for a long time on that one.
I dealt with that subtly in the outline that I suggested to you on page 1 of what we sent out. We'll get to it when we come to the pages. Yeah, but it's a very interesting point. I noted that, and you'll see what I did with it. All right, but let's go. I want to do the Maimonidean. My question is Held a Maimonidean in the sense that he places a lot of emphasis on balance. He meant so far a lot of his discussions, where he's dealing with 2 different seemingly contradictory, or not contradictory, but opposite concepts. And he ends up, trying to say, we need to consider both. And that reminded me of Maimonides. And so I wanted to do this introduction from the writings of the Rambam. Well, there's this introductory thing from Wikipedia just to create the background. But then the key thing is the Mishnah Torah reading, which the importance of that being, because from his perspective, what is there, that's law, right? Remember, Mishnah Torah is not philosophy. There is philosophy in Mishnah Torah, but everything he does in Mishnah Torah is intended to be law. And so he deals with this with respect to humility and with respect to anger. Okay? Dealing with anger and humility versus arrogance. So we're going to read that. We'll see what that is. So those are the things that what I wanted to look at today. But I want to even take it a bit further. I don't think I sent you this. I didn't send you this page in Hebrew, did I?
No.
All right. I'll discuss that with you because it's non-vocalized and it's a little bit more advanced than simple Hebrew. So I didn't know who would be able to read it. I'll deal with that when we finish with this stuff. All right. So Bert, you had your hand up.
Oh, I just wanted to make a comment. I had the impression it was like a kitchen sink. That he had a lot of index cards with a lot of sources, and he wanted to make sure he got everything in there.
Right. Yeah.
And so I would agree with you. 20% impression of the work probably would have been helpful.
Yeah. But I think, yes, he does that. But yes, you're right. But, right. But he often ends up, recognizing, a tendency in two different directions. And again, that's understandable given the fact you're dealing with a 3,000
Sure.
tradition. And there's no way that you can have absolutely consistent opinions, or perspectives when you have a tradition that extensive. I mean, you can say, yes, everybody in that tradition, there's one God. Fine. But I could argue even in biblical sources, it's clear that while the Bible itself stands for monotheism, it's clear that there are a lot of Israelites in the biblical period who didn't necessarily agree with that concept or had variations on the theme that included other deities. That's today, unless you're totally closed-minded, that's a fact. And the point is that the biblical prophets say the same thing. Okay?
In that sense, Torah isn't just the text; it's also the discussion.
Yeah, right. And you have different perspectives on it. Even from a monotheistic point of view, there's different notions. Well, what kind of a God is God? Right. So, I mean, and that's fine because you can't help but having that kind of complexity when you're dealing with it's very interesting because Greek philosophy obviously had a huge impact beyond its, the great period of Athens in the, 4th, 5th centuries BCE, right? I mean, with the impact that it had on Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, was powerful. And even down to Spinoza, because a lot of he was influenced in his thinking, by Maimonides, but he also was reading other stuff. So, he knew his philosophy was richer than just simply the Judaic philosophy. But so the ripple effect of Greek philosophy was huge. But once you hit the modern period, a lot of that gets, thrown out. A lot of it is kept, but a lot of it gets thrown out simply because his assumptions, Aristotle's assumptions, for example, were wrong about many things. So anyway, we have to. All right, that's why I wanted to talk about this. All right, Bert, you wanted to add?
Yeah, was there any influence on Maimonides from Chinese philosophy and the idea of the golden mean?
Well, the golden mean that he's talking about is from Alexander. Is from Aristotle.
Okay. I know Chinese philosophy has that very same concept.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, there is that is a very pragmatic argument. Because extremes. I mean, look at the world today. One of the problems in the world today is that rather than seeking the golden mean, so to speak, the extremes on both sides, in many cases, are the ones that are having the loudest voices. And it's not a healthy situation. That's when things get very dicey. So, yeah. Anyway, all right. So the first thing, you can read that over, the thing from Wikipedia, but basically it talks about the fact that you find this. Then I chose something that came from the Law Code, but if you look at his introduction to Pirkei Avot, which is mentioned in the third paragraph of that sheet that I sent you, it's called the Shmona Prakim, the 8 chapters. That is an early writing. His commentary on the Mishnah was one of his earliest works. But there also he lays out how that whole concept of humility, of being that's something that you can push to the extreme. The whole point being that the ego, he doesn't know that word, but effectively it's what he's talking about. The selfish thrust of human, of the human mind, of the human person, is very powerful. And as I've said before, it's for survival, right? I got to take care of myself. I got to survive, and that makes us very egotistical. And the whole concept of the Yetzer Hara, right? The inclination toward evil. Yes, that's exactly the point. And the rabbis say there needs to be a powerful force pushing in the other direction, and that's what they say Torah does. So that's their answer to that. But the issue itself is obvious. We are very, by our nature's self-preservation, we are egotistical. And therefore, the need to compensate for that or to push back at it requires a lot of effort. And, most systems, I think, would agree with that. But the question is to what degree? Okay, and that's, Maimonides it breaks away from the principle of the golden mean. That's what he's saying. Yes. Okay, so Tybal.
Just a fast one. When you asked us, is the author a Maimonidean, there was something, it made me think, and I just looked up, because if you asked me what is he, I'd say a Heschelian, if that's a term. I mean, not so much in this book, but just knowing how important Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel was to him. And I just looked up and found Heschel wrote a bio of Maimonides. So I think then it would make Shai Held a Maimonidean, because if someone is so influential, that influences anyway. So I want to vote yes.
That's very interesting.
But I'll feel better if Bobby Meth is voting yes with me.
Okay, Bobby.
After his big success.
Yes.
So the golden mean is Yimena Nili Mili Uksha'ani Lachrimani.
Not really, not according to Rembaum.
How's it different?
And what he says is the following. It's very interesting, because you think that's what it is, but it's not. Here's what he says. I am responsible for making sure that I do Torah. It's, in other words, free will, because he believes in free will. Okay, so doing Torah is my responsibility. That's line one, first one. Uchshani atzmi ma'ani, and he picks up on the word of what am I, not who am I. It's not me ani. It's what am I. And in the word ma, he sees it has something to do with my makeup. What am I? And his very point is, what am I? I'm flesh and blood. I am a person. I have this ego thing in me. Okay, and it concludes, Vim lo shaveh matai, and if not now, when? Therefore, I must act immediately to counteract this selfishness within me, using my free will to study Torah, in order to balance it out and so that I can become an ethical person. That's how he reads it. And I happen to think he's got some very good points there. Because the use of what am I, talks to my character. What's my nature? Okay? And the first, it's because that to me, that's the key thing. It doesn't say me, ani, who am I? In other words, who am I if I only care for myself, right? So there, you get that's an outward expression. So therefore you can conclude. But then the point is, what's the urgency of the last line? So his point is, since I'm talking about a huge weakness within me, my makeup, which he says is my ego, my tendency to be selfish, okay? That requires immediate action. Hence the urgency of the third line, if not now, when. That's what he says. I happen to think that he's got a point there that a lot of people have not looked at. Everybody quickly decides, well, it's okay. I understand that I am for myself. It makes you sound very egotistical, And Rembaum removes that right away. He says, no, that line has nothing to do with my egotism. That means that first line, means I have to be responsible for myself. It puts responsibility on my shoulders. Okay? That's what it is. And I happen to think that's much more in tune with what Torah is about, because Torah says you have a responsibility to learn Torah. I'm speaking Torah in the broadest sense, okay, not just the 5 books of Moses. You have a responsibility to learn Torah and let it govern your life. It's your job. And the reason why it's such a big job is because you're selfish. That's your basic nature, self-preservation. So therefore, you got to get to it right away, okay, and deal with it. And as I said before, this notion that the rabbis tell us, I'm going back and repeating myself, I just want you to drill it into your heads, okay? I'm going to be Shai Held. I'm repeating what I said a few moments ago, okay? The Torah is given to produce guidance for your life, all right? And you got to do that. The reason is because you have a Yetzer Hara in you, which is powerful. And the rabbis push on that point. Therefore, you need Torah and the whole point is, and they say this, the study of Torah and the acting according to Torah keeps the Yetzer Hara in check. And that's urgent. Get to it now. Okay? So Rambam basically is encapsulating that bit of rabbinic perspective. And I think that's why I think he's right. But that's my opinion. All right, Marion.
So preservation is the key. And part of what I would say here is that this is all developmental. So it starts at the beginning when we are only self-centered and we develop socially to be more outer directed.
Yes.
So one of the things the Torah is doing is helping us, in a way, reminding us that God is one, that we are, this thing of not for you, for me is really, it's a duality, but it's not a duality. It's really about the oneness, that we are one with God. And developmentally, we go through stages where we move from the self, being the preservation, hopefully in a good developmental sequence, we end up in a way where we are more socially or other oriented. And some of us have more of the other oriented gene than the others, but in general, that's where we move developmentally. And so what I see Torah as doing is focusing us on this other directed, this social, this piece where we are connected with everyone. and reminding us, because as an infant, you're connected, and it's like, but they're me. It's just like that, they're me. And it's different as we get older and we develop the outer piece, and that can be a painful development. So some of us need a lot more reinforcement, guidance. And, you've also heard this thing, I'm sure, with the brain that I think it takes 8 positives. There are eight negatives to a positive thought. So we have to continually, this has all been done on research. This is, it's either 8 or 10 or something. Anyway, the idea is that our brain goes toward negative thoughts first, and this is part of the preservation. And so we have to cultivate, we have to grow those neurons that are going to make us into the positive piece. So It's like when you have a negative thought, you immediately, I recommend people immediately follow it with the positive thought right afterwards, so that doesn't linger in there, and the new neuronal connections are made. But so it's really interesting that the Jews knew all this stuff 1,000,000 years ago before we, have science figured it out by science.
Yeah, and I think, that that's the whole point of, that's why we can't accept original sin. Right? Because original sin says it's such a flaw that you can't do it yourself. Right? You need help from somebody. Right? And that's why you had to have, Jesus. I mean, that's basic Christianity. Now, I know modern approaches to Christianity sort of interpret that. I'm not into modern, Christian theology. But, the more traditional sides of it, if you think about evangelical Christianity, Catholicism, Lutheranism, Anglican, any place where you have either, the notion of the the centrality of the literal meaning of the New Testament, plus the various rituals, right, of that these major church groups have. The Eucharist, taking the wafer, right? All that stuff. It's predicated on the notion that you need to have the intermediation of that person in order to be able to go to God. Where our perspective is, no, it's up to you. You want a path to God? You have to work on it. All right, that's what I liked about Maimonides' reading of Imin Anili Mili. That fits in so nicely with the Jewish perspective. So okay, all right.
I had to step away for a second. Okay, I'm back.
All right, but your hand is up.
I hit lower hand twice. I don't know what's going on.
Oh, all right.
I hit lower hand, but it's not lowering.
All right.
I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to change the view, see if that helps.
All right. Okay. I'm going to move on. All right. Now let's look, though. Let's look at the Mishnah Torah section. Okay. So there are temperaments with regard to which a man, that's how he wrote it, is forbidden to follow the middle path. Is forbidden to follow the middle path. He should move away from one extreme and adopt the other. Among these is arrogance. If a man is only humble, he's not following a good path. Rather, he must hold himself lowly and his spirit very unassuming. That is why Numbers 12:3 describes our teacher Moses as very humble, right? Anav ma'od. Very humble. Therefore, our sages directed, hold oneself very, very lowly. Also, they declared, whoever is arrogant is as if he denied God's presence, as implied by Deuteronomy 8:14, and your heart will be haughty, and you will forget God, your Lord. Furthermore, they said, whoever is arrogant should be placed under a ban of ostracism. This applies even if he's only somewhat arrogant. Okay, so this is Rambam's perspective, all right? And I would say our arrogance really is I would say self-centered, egotistical. All right, so that's there. He has said it. Okay. All right, Bert.
I just had a question. It says if a man is only humble, he's not following a good path, and then it seems to me he's saying to be only humble.
No, he's saying it's got to be deep humility. That's what I think he's trying to say here.
Oh, okay. So only somewhat humble.
Right, exactly. That's why Moses was very humble.
I see. Okay. I was thinking with respect to anger.
No, anger's next.
Right.
Yeah. All right, but keep in mind it's really interesting because that statement is in Numbers 12, right? As a result of that's when Miriam and Aaron gang up on him, and basically they say to God, "What are we, chopped liver? Why is everything Moses? What about us?" Okay, and God responds, you don't get it. The way I'm going to put words in God's mouth here, but basically saying, you guys are acting exactly in antithesis of the way Moses acts. Moses has never said anything about focusing on him. Everything he's done has been either for my sake or for the sake of the people. All right, and if you read everything up until that point, I mean, even with the multiple traditions that we have, that's the way it's been. The only time prior to that, when he begs for some, take me into consideration, is in chapter 11 when they rebel and when God provides them with the manna and they get sick to their stomachs and so forth. But that's the second manna provision. But the point is, at one point there in chapter 11, he says, "Take my life. I can't carry this anymore." All right, he's asking, relieve me of this, kill me, because the pressure at that point became too heavy on him. All right, but the fact is, and that begins a process, by the way, my reading, this is another subject, but my reading is that from that point on, there's a decline in Moses. I'm not going to talk about that now, but it's as if Miriam and Aaron, particularly Miriam, was the instigator here. She's the oldest of the siblings, so she was the instigator, and she must have sensed that there was a problem, and she jumps in. Okay, at that moment when it seems as if Moses is feeling insecure. So that's when that happens. But just Margaret, I see your hand. But keep in mind, because this is something I talked about in shul on Saturday evening. That's why when Moses hit the rock the second time when he was supposed to talk to it, that's why he pushed God's button, because his humility suddenly went out the door. Because he said, "Do you think we can bring water from that rock?" We meaning he and Aaron. It's the first time he associates himself with God's activity, what deserves to be God's activity. Up until that point, it's always God, God, God. And suddenly his humility cracked. And the way it's set up in the text is that they become, in God's eyes, rebels against God. Because God says that twice after this, he calls them, he says, "Maritem bi," you have rebelled against me. And that is exactly the same term that is used to describe Korach and his people when God tells Aaron to put his staff into the tabernacle. He says, "You show the staff to rebels and they'll stop rebelling, because it'll remind them of the punishment that Korach and his team had and what it brought upon the people." Okay? And he uses the same word for Moses and Aaron, okay, later on. So that pushed his button. But up until that point, indeed, chapter 12, he has been extremely humble. Yes. Okay, Margaret.
I feel like I have like a lack of vocabulary to talk about an attitude that is different from arrogance, but yet balances out humility. I guess I don't think of humility and arrogance as opposites. I think of, I can see that that's a continuum in one respect, but what about just the importance of being self-respecting? Not caring for yourself, right? And ensuring that you're not neglecting, really what is a gift from God, which is you, right? You know
Yes.
what I mean?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what is that? I mean, what would you say that is? I mean,
All right.
it's not, I guess, arrogant. It's not arrogance, right? It's
No. Self-preservation is part of our makeup. Okay, nobody deny it. Here, your answer, Rembaum answered your question. Okay, because in his Perush LaMishnah, all right, again, the same place where he develops this notion of humility, all right, his commentary on the Mishnah. Okay, so in his commentary on Pirkei Avot chapter 2, number 18, Mishnah 18, he makes the point. I'm quoting here, and this is something that that Held actually, I think, notes on one of his footnotes. If one has a base view of oneself, one will readily do base things. You have to have a positive view of yourself. We've talked about remember we read about this before. You have to have a sense of self-respect. There's nothing wrong with that. And the point is, you can have self-respect and be a humble person, right? You can have self-respect and be a humble person. That's not mutually exclusive. What we're talking about here is the need to put humility into a significant effort on your part, right? And then you have to if you think about all kinds of relationships, but if you only think of yourself, then you don't have relationship, right? Because relationship means that you need the other person. You have value in the other person. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a relationship with them. And so it requires thoughtfulness. Yes, but the fact is, yes, you are obligated to manage your own health. You're obligated to feed yourself when you need to eat, right? And you can go and seek food for yourself. But when you seek food for yourself, you needn't go and hoard the food, so it shouldn't be available for other people. And it is people who are sort of off balance or who have fears, extreme fears. I'm thinking of people, pardon me for this, but you see this, I've seen this throughout my years in the rabbinate, kiddush after services. And there are people, you're waiting in line to get your stuff. And, you want to give yourself a good lunch, getting the lunch, okay? And you want to be able to satisfy your hunger, absolutely, okay? But you have people who walk away with food piled this high. And it's clearly more than, an average person would eat, all right? And I can understand people, and we've had such people at synagogue who are poor, right? And who take that and bring it home with them. And I understand that. In a sense, they're dealing with the reality of their life. And I'm willing to forgive them on that because they don't know where their next meal's coming from. Okay. But there are people who I know are not poor. And there they are loading up their plate like it was the last meal they were ever going to eat, totally disregarding the fact that there are other people there who have to eat as well. So that requires you to be a balanced person, right? You got to say, okay, I'm hungry, but I know I can be satisfied with this. All right. And, you got to think. There are people behind me in line. That's this is a very mundane type of a thing, but it shows you that these are not theoretical issues. Okay. So yes, balance. Here Rambam would be right. Okay. Balance. Consider yourself, but consider the other person as well. Rambam would not disagree with that. Okay. All right. Marion and Tybal. I don't know who came first, but I'll follow. M comes before T. Okay, Marion.
No, I'm gonna pass. It's the thing is gone. It's fine.
Okay. All right, Tybal.
So sorry, even though it's gone, I just got stuck on something. And I want to know if you think that Rambam was writing with hyperbole, because this is back on banning people, putting them in harem with arrogance, because I think many times human beings that are either shy or introspective or may have social anxiety, other people perceive them as being arrogant when in fact it isn't arrogance, it's something else. And it seems to me that if Rambam really meant that the arrogance should be placed under a ban of ostracism, what would happen in human affairs is all of the energy would be going to shifting alliances, saying, let's ban this one for doing that and ban this one for doing this. It would totally render the rabbinic system dysfunctional if rabbis were going to start sitting in judgment. So was this hyperbole, or do you think he was serious about the leaders of the community banning the arrogant?
I think what we can conclude from all of this is something that the individual has to deal with. Okay. And I think he may have used some hyperbole here. Yes. Right. Because to ostracize, I mean, unless we're talking here about a person whose arrogance has become so extreme that it does damage to the community. I can give you an example of that existed in the Middle Ages. There's no question about it. There were wealthy members of Jewish communities who refused to pay the taxes that were due to the community. Now, from those taxes, the community supported their services that they provided to the people, but they also, a chunk of that would be sent to the overlord, okay, the king, the baron, whomever, who has the covenant with the community and would defend the community and allow the community to function autonomously. Okay, so these wealthy people would say, no, I'm the one who represents us in the courts of these powerful people. Why should I have to do that and pay taxes as well? Okay? And so because of that, after warning and warning and warning, and that's real arrogance, isn't it? So the community would then put him in cherem, kick him out, make him untouchable, sever his ties with any other Jews, and could have a profound impact on his relations in other communities. Okay? Cherem was the worst thing that the Jews in the Middle Ages could impose upon a person. We couldn't, with rare exceptions, we could not implement capital punishment. The governments didn't allow us to do that. But yeah, cherem, yep, absolutely. And usually that cherem was not to a poor person or even a middle-class person. It was to a wealthy person who overstepped his bounds because of his arrogance. So in that respect, yes, the community has to act, and that may be what he has in mind. I don't know. Many communities, had that problem.
It was the somewhat word that really got me going.
Wait, somebody's talking. Bobby, is that you?
No, I think it's Bonnie.
Bonnie? Somebody's talking in the background. Mute.
That could have been the reason we took out the other part. That has it shorted it. It could have big problem.
Shall I try and then be done? Because the last thing in that paragraph says this applies even if he is only somewhat arrogant.
Yeah, I think Maimonides is just being over the top here.
Oh, no.
I mean, just because he wrote it doesn't mean it's the word of God, He may have had a bad day. Because in a sense, he's refuting, that doesn't make sense. Doesn't. All right. Anyway, but I do think that's what he has in mind. Okay. All right. Bert.
Two things. First of all, I just wanted to say that not paying your taxes by the wealthy still exists in our day. I've heard. I've heard,
yes.
But there are legal
to the contrary notwithstanding. Yes.
Right, there are legal penalties for that. But I think also the particular example you gave made me go back to the book and think of the responsibility to the community and the importance of contributing to the support of the whole community, and that it's not just about the individual that he gets into, I think, in chapter 7. Right. And, in talking with my kids and grandkids, we talk about taxes. I say, frankly, I'm happy to pay taxes. I think it's important to pay taxes, right, even though everybody hates it, because somebody's got to pave the road. Somebody's got to pay for the police. Somebody's got to pay for for all the services that we get.
Right. Yes. Correct. But there's something else here. Well, let's read on. Now he's going to talk about anger. Okay. So anger is also an exceptionally bad quality. It is fitting and proper that one move away from it and adopt the opposite extreme. He should school himself not to become angry even when it is fitting to be angry. If he should wish to arouse fear in his children and his household, or within the community if he's a communal leader, and wishes to be angry at them to motivate them to return to the proper path, he should present an angry front to them to punish them, but he should be inwardly calm. He should be like one who acts out the part of an angry man in his wrath, but is not himself angry. That's his solution. Pretend to be angry, but don't be angry. Control it.
Because they see it struggle.
Okay. So, and then he quotes angry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Then finally,
so right now,
this is the last paragraph.
Yeah, strong. So you're going about 60-degree error. So that's about right.
Rabbi Rembaum, you can go in the participants list and mute Bonnie.
Perfect.
If you open the participants list and you just click on her
Bonnie, are
microphone.
You there?
I think she's walked away.
Just get
so you can go in the participants list because you're host. Yeah, there you go. You fixed it.
Yeah, Bobby is also muted. He did it himself. All right, fine. Anyway, the last paragraph, though. This is the way of the righteous. They accept humiliation, but do not humiliate others. They listen when they are shamed, but they do not answer. They do this with love and are joyous in their sufferings. Of them, Judges 5:31 states, and those who love him, God, are like the sun when it comes out in its strength. Okay? I appreciate what he's trying to do, but I think sometimes he goes over the top. I don't think anybody should joyously accept sufferings. I don't think that's healthy. I don't think that what it does is it encourages people sometimes to, a person who is humble has a right to respond strongly if someone has done something that is improper, even if the impropriety is aimed at them. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. By the way, I see your hand. Hold on, Margaret, just a second. Yeah. There's a statement in the Psalms. Some of us who took the Psalms class last semester. Rabot ra'ot tzaddik, umikulam yitzileno Hashem. The righteous person suffers great evil, but God will protect them from all of it. The righteous person suffers evil. Okay, and this goes to something that somebody alluded to a moment ago. Maybe it was your bird, I don't remember. Maybe it was Tybal, I don't remember. The point being that sometimes the community, I think Tybal, you raised it, the community, individuals, look at people who are righteous, humble, righteous people, and get angry at them. Number one, because they're different. They don't always follow the crowd. Number two, they hold themselves up to high standards and will expect others to try to move to those standards as well and say so publicly. And even if they say so quietly, they make other people feel guilty or feel incompetent socially. And consequently, when people feel that way, they get angry at the source of their feeling, whether they're aware of it or not. And so sometimes people who are truly righteous can get themselves in trouble by being too righteous because of what other people think of them. I mean, I know people like that. I know people, who are, who will be the first one to volunteer to help when someone is in need, not necessarily financially, but to go to the person, spend time with the person, and everybody knows, that person will jump, and a lot of people will appreciate that, but there are going to be these people, oh, there he goes again, there she goes again. Boy, they really like to be in the limelight, don't they? Because they're sitting together. Who will do this? Same person raises their hand all the time. Look at that. All they want is this public recognition. They don't want public recognition. Nobody else is doing anything, so they have to step forward. And in a certain respect, they're right, but people get angry at them. I've seen that. Okay? And so there is that side to it. So, and it's therefore, I think the answer to that is that people who are balanced and appreciate what a righteous person like that is doing, if that happens, they should stand up for that person. And they should say, what, you're yelling at this person because you think they're showing off? No, they're not showing off. Nobody else responded. You should be proud that they're part of our community. You're not offering to do it, are you? So if they do it, isn't that wonderful? Okay, and that's where the community's got to stand by these people so they don't suffer this kind of humiliation. That's what I would have liked Rembaum to say. Okay, but I totally respect his attempt here. And both of these counts, I basically agree with him. But, it fits into a larger spectrum, and it has to be taken into consideration. All right, Margaret, you'd want to add something? No, okay. So I just wanted to say, just going back to something that Held does, I think he generally, he agrees with Rembaum. I mean, he wouldn't argue with Rembaum's basic premise of balance. And my reading of it is that he really stays there. He's trying to maintain that even with respect to the discussion that we've just been having. People should basically be humble and not, push themselves forward too much. But he would probably disagree with Rembaum that it should be to the point where you joyously accept suffering. I don't think Held is going to hold with that position. That's not how he's writing. And he puts a lot of responsibility on our shoulders to maintain the balance. Okay? This has to do also with how we deal, there was a discussion, and I don't want to go into it right now because it's too complicated. The whole discussion of parents and children, right? And this whole notion that there are some parents say, look, the child has to set their own path, let them decide for themselves. And that's not the Jewish way, because Jewish way has parents as an obligation to teach their kids, to inculcate them with values, and to even, as in the Talmud says, you got to prepare them for a job. Okay, now if as mature people they choose to work in something else, that's fine. It's sure at a certain point, and this is where the balance comes into play. We said before, you gotta deal. I think this is what Marion said. When kids come into the world, they're very selfish, self-centered, right? Self-centered. Feed me. I got a pain. Help me. Clean me. Blah, whatever. But they can only, we have to help them move forward into the relational aspect of things. To build on security, they should feel parents have to give their kids a sense of security with the parent. And then the parent can really take over and guide and help move the child into the set of standards by which they live. Hopefully the parents will be living in accordance with a set of good values. Now, we know the problem with all this is that if the parents' values are bad, then they're going to raise their kid with bad values. Okay, that's the flip side. And that's where society comes into play and deals with the bad values that the family has, expressed. If they're causing pain to others, Anyway, but the point is, yes, but parents at the same time have to figure out, based upon their feelings about their kids, they have to slowly back off and allow the kids to make choices. So on the other hand, if you're going to keep nudging your kid, become a doctor. I want you to be a doctor, because it's a good job for a Jewish person should become a doctor. Lawyer, good thing, a lawyer. Become an accountant. You learn how to deal with money. It's good for you. This is, I'm talking about the stereotypes, old stereotypes. I don't know if people know those stereotypes anymore, but those are the stereotypes. Okay. But the point is, no. And if a good parent should learn what are the strengths of the child. What is it that they really can do well? Okay. So if you got a child who has artistic skills, and they want to express that, do it. At a certain point, you may have to sit down with them, have a good talk, and say, okay, if you're going to become an artist, how are you going to put bread on the table? It could take decades before you get recognized, okay? Because there are a dime a dozen out there. A lot of good people, a lot of good art. So you have to figure that out. You got to help them talk about this, talk to them about it. So this getting back to this concept, and so balance, I think, is a very valid concept, and it's I would say it's a very Jewish concept, definitely a Jewish concept, and it's that. So his whole discussion of this, which it runs, as you see, throughout a lot of. It's very good, and I give him a lot of credit for what he has done, and the research that he put into this is just outstanding. That's All right. Any other comments, questions? I want to move on to the next to today's stuff. We're not going to finish it, but it's okay. We can take a plunge. Okay, so he's dealing with this whole thing, chapter 6 and 7, the whole question of helping people in need. That was what struck me. And how do you define whom you help? Okay. Do you have total impartiality? In other words, a person in need is a person in need, whether it's your family, the people next door, or somebody 5 miles away whom you don't know. So can you prioritize or not?
Yes.
Yes.
So the point, so he says, yes, because it's natural, right? He says it's natural.
I agree.
Because your natural tendency is to care for those closest to you. Your bond with them is the most powerful. And you shouldn't deny that. Then you are denying nature. You're denying, then this is not a matter of yourself, right? These are other people in your life. But the fact is, it is a natural thing for a parent to take care of their children. And one would hope that it would be a natural thing at the other end of the spectrum for the children to care for their parents who gave them life. Okay, now I realize that in the interim years, there are many instances when parents and children have a falling out. Okay, and that's very sad. But the point is, he makes that point. He quotes other tendencies that exist in this society where there's a lot of leveling that goes on in our society. Equality means everybody's on the same level, and no one should have any kind of prioritization, preferences, et cetera, et cetera. All right. Now, clearly there are people who see that as values. There are others, obviously, who don't. I don't know statistically where we sit on that. I'm not going to even get into that. But from a Jewish perspective, there is no question that there are obligations that begin with the family. Yes. But at the same time, we are part of a larger family called humankind. And the point that he's trying to make here, and rightfully so, is that we cannot sever our bonds to others whom we don't know, but who may be in great need. And humankind has an obligation for humans to stand with humans. And in Judaism, you can see the roots of that are in how the tradition defines the nature of relationships within a larger spectrum. Okay, so that's what motivated me to create this order of relationships, which I'll get to in just a second on the first page of what I sent you. All right, Bert.
I just wanted to mention I found this discussion very interesting, having faced it in my own life. And very often we have to choose between, there's infinite need and limited resource. And we can't all save the world. And I found, personally in my life, found that this Jewish idea, which you're about to outline, of concentric circles of responsibility to be very helpful in terms of making what are very difficult decisions. I will also add, he didn't add animals here. And I know there was this fascinating study many years ago of high school students who were asked if you came to a river and your dog was drowning and a person you didn't know was drowning, who would you save? And most of them said the dog.
Right. Yes. Yep. Relationships. Right. Yes. So anyway, so if you look on the page, I don't know if you have it in front of you. So these are just based upon sort of an encyclopedic view, and I don't claim to know everything by heart, please, of how we understand who we are in what social settings, et cetera, et cetera. So I listed 5 concentric circles, okay? So I began with those for whom we say Kaddish, right? And they are parent, spouse, child, sibling. Because those are the ones, those are, obviously spouse is not blood, but that is a special bond of choice. And, it elevates itself. And realistically speaking, the bonding that takes place between spouses can end up being the most powerful bond of the whole lot of them, because as our children get older and as our siblings, mature as we are, they become more and more independent. And there are things that we deal with, we talk about, we react to with our spouses as our relationship evolves, are much more intimate, in many cases more powerful than our relationships, with the others. On the other hand, having said that, there is nothing more devastating than the death of a child, okay, with regard to grieving, okay? That's the hardest thing. And I can tell you over and over and over again in these situations, which I've dealt with on numerous occasions, the parent says, why did she go before I went? I'm supposed to go before they do. Okay, and I understand that. All right, I'm just mentioning that. But the reality is, that can be said by people who have neglected their relationships with their kids and feel guilty about it if this happens. I could have been there for them. Why wasn't I? Okay, so it's not just a matter of loss, it's a matter of guilt. It's very complicated. But in general, so the basic level then of, I would say, mandated, these are sort of mandated statuses, okay? So after that, you have your extended family and close friends. I'm putting them together because we said, it came up before, Bert, you raised this, that a very good friend, you could be more closer to friends than you are with your aunts and uncles and cousins. I don't think that's uncommon, actually. So I would say you put them all together in that category. Then you have your friends, and people with whom you have relationships, not as close as the others. And then moving beyond that, you have a community. You have a relationship with your community, however you would define that. And then finally, you have a national, even bigger than the community, and humankind, right? I'm sort of lumping them together because nation is, in many ways, I'm going to say artificial, but it is a cultural, social design designated element. But eventually, it's humankind. That's why I say nation and or. Yes, I probably would feel more attached to, have an obligation to deal with the poor people in America than I would necessarily have to do the poor people in some other country. But on the other hand, if there are mass famines, in other places, like there are in other places, because of, let's say, what's going on now with climate change, and there's an opportunity to give to something like CARE, who will send food over to somebody who's starving in some other country, I will support that because I feel I have an obligation. Those are human beings. So, obviously, what I do here, what I do with my community, those are going to have, sort of higher priorities, or maybe it's difficult community, national here. I tend to be more supportive of Jewish causes because we are few in number, and too many of us prioritize in the other direction, and so some of us have got to try to make up the difference. And that, by the way, that I'll just be very honest with you, that bothers the heck out of me. I go to see. I love to go to music. I love to, listen to classical music. So we get tickets from, with the symphony. I love to go to museums and see art and all this stuff. And then I look at the names of the donors, and the Jews are overrepresented. based upon names. That's not a scientific survey, believe me. Okay. But there we are at the top of the list very often. That's great. Nice. I'm proud, But what do they give to their synagogues? Are they members of synagogues? Do they contribute to anything in Israel? Okay. These kinds of questions. And we all know that it's not that way. So that bothers me. There are only 15 million of us around the world. And, rumors to the contrary notwithstanding, we have our own internal problems, people who need, so we got to keep that in mind. Anyway, so this is how these are the concentric circles that I've tried to define. And then we're going to see about how the ethics of caring, my perspective, and you can argue with me, my perspective on how Judaism deals with that. Okay, Bert.
Where would the Jewish community fit in with this hierarchy? Is that part of community?
Yes.
But there's a difference between community as in my city and the Jewish people.
No, I'm saying my Jewish community. I should have put that in.
Oh, you meant Jewish community, and then, okay.
Right. Yeah. Right. I mean, I could have put, broader community under nation, yes. I mean, I'm concerned about obviously poor people here and homelessness here, there's no question about it. But, and I would feel an obligation. It's in this instance, I'm trying to be, brutally honest here. There's a selfish side to it in the sense that some of the communal problems, community, not Jewish, let's say Los Angeles, city of Los Angeles, LA County, the issues that we face here, the issue becomes they affect me. I mean, so there's a selfish side to this as well, because I mean, if we need to retrain police so that they can be more effective in dealing with different ethnic groups, okay, then that to me that's important, because you want to have police working harmoniously with all of the groups in the community to deal with crime. Okay, and if you don't have harmonious relations with the community, you're not going to deal with crime as effectively. They're not going to turn to you when crime occurs. And, you may overreact to crimes. So you got to, I'm in favor of police reform. Never was in favor of defunding the police. To me, that's the stupidest idea I ever heard in my life. But the notion of refunding and then, figuring out, number one, how you spend the money, and number two, whom you bring into the police corps, be more careful in whom you recruit. That is something that I totally support because it makes me more secure. Okay. Same thing with dealing with homelessness. All right. I mean, I'm not afraid that a homeless person is going to attack me necessarily, although we know of instances when that happens. But I don't know if that's the main issue. The main issue is these are people who are number one, suffering. Number two, are causing problems on streets, and affecting the normal activities of communities. And they should be helped in a meaningful way. And I understand from personal experience, not that I've ever been homeless, but in working with homeless people, it is a big job. It is a huge, huge challenge, but it's got to be addressed. And there are, avenues that are being discussed, but I don't know if the support for them have really manifested themselves. All right. So yes, so I would say there is a selfish, not a negative selfish, because I do have to worry about my personal safety and that of my family. Yes, that's not irresponsible. But if that requires, doing things at a communal level that requires my support, either by voting or paying taxes or whatever, and they are being addressed, then good. So I would support that. as opposed to, let's say, a homeless problem in Seattle. I would say it's the responsibility of the Seattle community to deal with that. Okay, but at the national level, that's something else again, because there are all kinds of ripple effects from social problems 2,000 miles away from me here, from us here, but ultimately they could have an effect on us. So, I'm concerned about those as well. Okay. But the Jewish community at the same time, because of neglect on the part of Jews, and I say that very bluntly, puts a lot of pressure on me to be as supportive as I can. Okay. And I'm saying up front, that's where a lot of our tzedakah goes, because you got to do it. And I wish you all in advance a good Shabbos. And I say, thanks every time now, Shalom al Yisrael, please God. We could use a big dose of that. Pray for it. Work on it. All right. Be well. Stay healthy.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.